Bashar al-Assad was a brutal dictator. He was a tyrant. He crushed his own people. He caused the Civil War. When they demonstrated for reforms, he attacked them. He brutalized them. He brought in tanks and ultimately chemical weapons. Well, this caused the society of Syria to splinter. And so he had a number of different revolutionary groups that rose up. And you had the international community, as it watched this happen, call for the removal of Assad, because he was a tyrant whose actions were destabilizing his own country and threatened to further destabilize the Middle East. But he was also violating the human rights and the human dignity of his own people, which is something to which the international order is committed, that the United Nations is committed, and the United Nations is a treaty to which all 193 countries have agreed to and have agreed to be bound by, as well as, and also to, the countries of the world accept the Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which came out in 1948. So the actions of Assad were in violation of the norms of the international community. And by the way, Syria was a member of the UN. So Assad caused the civil war that lasted for a dozen years and was very bloody. About 13 million were displaced, 600,000 killed. A couple of horrible prisons were operated, Sadanaya and Erba. And he used chemical weapons against his own people, which is a violation, again, of international conventions. The international community responded by calling for his removal. As terrorist groups came into Syria, the international community, through the United Nations Security Council, said we have to fight these groups, so they passed a resolution. And so countries went to Syria to fight the terrorists. The UN also called for a change of regime, for a better government in Syria. And there were some talks in Geneva and some in Astana. They didn't seem to go anywhere. But the reality is that the Russians and the Iranians propped up Assad, who was a brutal dictator. Now, there was a problem with humanitarian aid. There was the need to investigate the chemical weapons usage and find people to punish. And the UN weighed in on that too. And Assad did not allow the humanitarian aid to go to the people who needed it, of all different groups in Syria. So Assad was toppled in a pretty fast campaign led by al-Jilani of HTS. He's got a $10 million bounty on his head. HTS is a terrorist organization. Al-Jilani spent 5 years in a U.S. jail. But he led the fight. And in watching numerous interviews of him and reading articles about him, it is clear that he wants to form a government in Syria for the benefit of all the Syrians. And this is what the Syrian people want. Of all different ethnic types and religious types, they want a government for all Syrians. As far as I know, there has been no persecution of Christians, no threatened persecution of Christians by HTS or any other group in Syria. So any claims to the contrary are just unsupported, unless you can present some proof. So al-Jilani looks clear-eyed and serious about bringing Syria together again and rebuilding it. Now there's issues in the northeast, obviously with the Kurds. There are issues with the Turks and trying to determine various spheres of influence. Former U.S. Ambassador James Jeffrey to Syria, I believe it was, said that the United States did not promise the Kurds a separate country, just simply protection against the Assad regime and against the terrorists. So there is a definite call by the United Nations, by the international community, to work things out in Syria and to bring it all together. What you don't hear from the shills and the trolls and the jackal media and the alt media is the horrible things that Assad did and how glad the people are that he is gone. Um, Instead, you hear other things. How the U.S. was behind overthrowing Assad, which isn't entirely true, but the international community wanted him removed because he was a tyrant and he was a bloody dictator. But all that gets lost with the Jeffrey Sachs of the world and the other apologists for Putin. And Putin has had a horrific loss here. This was a terrific defeat. Um, the last I checked, he was negotiating to be allowed to keep some of his ships there in Tartus. But all the ships had been evacuated, and they don't have enough fuel to last very long. So they're going to have to get refueled in the middle of the sea, and they're not going to be allowed, from initial indications by the Turks under the Montreux Convention, to go back through the Straits of Dardanelles into the Black Sea. So this is a horrific defeat for Putin. You'll note nobody tried to go to Russia. Nobody's trying to get on their boats and planes, other than Assad, to go to Moscow. Because Russia is also a tyranny. And tyrannies, by their nature, are private people or the government using using the state for their own benefit and harming the people. And that is what Assad did. He was a tyrant. He had a tyranny. That's what he did. This is against the law of God. It's against everything that's decent when you become a tyrant. Now, what he did do is he gave what appeared to be peace and security to various ethnic and religious groups. This is a similar thing to what Saddam Hussein did. And this is a similar thing to what Putin does. He seems to give peace and security to everybody, but these dictators, these tyrants, are rifling the country. They're stealing. They're beggaring the population, and you're slowly being crushed. And this is what Assad did. This is what Putin did and is doing. So Putin's having a hard time. The Armenian prime minister, I believe, has come to the West and visited, so he wants closer ties with the West. Moldavia, in an election, rejected the Putin pro-Russian candidate. Romania, Supreme Court, threw out the election, first round of the elections, concerned, I believe, was Ceausescu, who was the Russian candidate, and he was able to get a large number of votes first time around due to money that came in through improper means, as I understand it. And secondly, because of TikTok. There were, last I read, there were about 25,000 accounts of TikTok where they just sprung up, or they'd been there for a while, and they started promoting this candidate, whose name I think was Georgescu. And so what you have in these countries that are pro-Putin or that have tyrants are, you have basically the leadership using the country and the machinery of state for their own wealth and benefit, while everybody else gets beggared. So this has been a huge defeat for Putin. And Prime Minister Tusk of Poland said, Russia can be defeated. They can be beaten. And he also said that the Russian economy is declining, and it is. The ruble is crashing. They're having problems getting chips and other equipment. Their industrial base is simply not growing. and that's from a variety of sources. Um, this is also a big blow to Iran, of course, which was supporting Hezbollah, which was hurt pretty badly by the Israelis. So, as this all wound down on December 8th and 9th, President Biden made some comments, which I think are very respectable. You have to remember that President Biden began his career at a time during the Cold War when there were principles and high ideals, and the political class held to those. And these principles and high ideals often manifested in international law and international conventions, various resolutions, and more. And so what you had was the development of norms of conduct. And you had this sense of an idea of international community. Now, maybe it was just simply the West versus the Soviet bloc, but you had this idea of international community. And you have this idea of international community persisting to this day, and we see it in the reaction to Syria, that is, Assad. So, this idea of international community is very important. It is an idea that goes all the way back to the natural law. And it's something that Catholic thinkers and theologians have always talked about, that you have a natural law community of nations. That's not always the case. That's not always the same viewpoint with other schools of thought, or with tyrants for that matter, because they don't see there being a community of nations. They see there being individual states. That was oftentimes the viewpoint that many of the thinkers after Hugo Grotius had, was credited for a long time with being the founder of international law. A lot of thinkers that followed him said, we are this individualistic, anarchic group of countries in the world, which is at odds with the natural law idea, the Catholic idea, which is that we are a community. We are a community of states. And we all need each other, all the states need each other for the purpose of helping every state. And so this idea of a legal community got real traction with the United Nations. And the United Nations was largely the result of the efforts of the United States and of the United Kingdom. Now, the ideas upon which the UN is based, in my view, are very simple. It's based on law. Law is reason. Law is rules. Law is this idea that we control our appetites and our desires and we help everyone else. And so to do that, the United Nations dedicated itself to peace, to bringing peace, to working for peace, to maintaining the peace, to the development, social and material, of peoples of the world, and to the protection of individual rights, fundamental rights. The right to have a family, the right to have a nation, the right to certain freedoms, such as speech, the right to a culture, all of these things. This is the world community that was formed in 1945 and after, and it developed. Tyrants break that. Wars, like Putin illegally and immorally started in Ukraine, breaks that community. And so this is very troubling when we see tyrants who come up on the scene. And it's very important to understand some important principles that we are all in it together. The United States is very much involved in the world and must stay involved in the world for good principle and right order. Now, this is what President Biden said. He said three things. He said, first, we're going to support Syria's neighbors. Second, we're going to help stability. And then third of all, he says, we will engage with the Syrian groups within Syria, including within the process led by the United Nations to establish a transition away from the Assad regime towards an independent, sovereign Syria. And the United Nations, during this whole time of civil war, wanted and called for a new government in Syria, where all these groups can get together and form the government, and the government can work. I may have mentioned it elsewhere, but there were discussions in Geneva and also in Astana to make that happen, but it never happened. You had Russia and Iran backing up the tyrant, so they didn't want to lose that power. So the breach of the international community belongs to Putin and Iran. Okay, so also too, the president in this talk from December 8th also talked about the things that the principles that guided him in dealing with the Syrian Civil War and that guided the United States. And you can read it in his talk. It's in my article. Now, the president-elect Donald Trump had something different to say. Of course, I can, and he said, quote, there was never much of a benefit in Syria for Russia other than to make Obama look really stupid. In any event, Syria is a mess. Not our friend. It is not our friend. The United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. Well, that's quite the contrary of what a community of nations is supposed to do. It's quite the contrary of what UN policy UN policy and U.S. policy has been. The nations get together and help each other restructure and rebuild in a right way. So right here, what Trump is showing is a complete lack of knowledge of international law, complete disregard of law, complete disregard of an international community, which fits with his personality, which is the individual who's out there to make money. They call him transactional, and what that means is he's in it for himself. It means that there's no principles. It means that there's no rules governing him except everybody walks away with some money. That's basically it. And I think this is very tragic that he has taken this point of view and is likely to maintain it from everything I have seen. Um, because he exhibits a lawless attitude, one which is harmful to the community of states, community of nations. And that goes against this natural law, this Catholic idea that we have this international community of states, of countries, and we're all in it together. Now, the United Nations is not perfect, but it sets certain norms and it can compel certain action, and people are supposed to work for peace, development, and human rights. But we see with Putin and Ukraine that doesn't happen. Okay. So let's talk about trolls and shills. It's really important to talk about them because they are certainly not going to talk about the things I'm talking to you about. They're not going to tell you how bad Assad was and how there's a community of countries, a community of nations, and they're going to praise Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, and several things, let me say, Donald Trump and Elon Musk, as this alt media, which is very powerful and very influential. And yesterday or the day before, Bloomberg agreed with me, something I said some time back, that what we have now with X or Twitter and much of the alt media with its alt narrative, which is loyal to Trump, Musk, what you have now is you have this giant ability to influence elected officials, if not intimidate them. Okay? And what Bloomberg said is that the senators and the representatives are being very careful what they say because they know that if they go against Trump, or it is perceived they're going against Trump by someone in Trump's coterie, then that they may stand the chance, the senators, the representatives, may stand a chance of getting primary. After all, Elon Musk is worth now, what, 400 billion? And I just saw something saying he's worth 500 billion. So you have an enormous amount of resources now tied to alt media and social media, which is going to be very influential with some people. It's going to scare a lot of people. And this is what we are encountering and what we are seeing. Um, so if you don't go with Trump or what his minions say, well, then you've got this electronic mob, you know, many of whom are everyday people, but many of whom are trolls, who are going to attack you online. And who knows, maybe it'll even get worse. So this is what we have, and this is what we're facing. But I want to talk some more about trolls and shills because they are important for this reason, obviously. But they've been around for a while, and they've been touting a narrative, as I've mentioned before, that's pro-Putin, anti-American, pro-Xi, pro-China, anti-American. And this narrative has been going on for many years. I'm talking a couple of decades. I talked to somebody earlier today, and this person said, "Yeah, we've all been in a bubble for a long time." I said, "I think that's right." Um, One thing that I discovered is when I unplugged for a while and looked at social media, is that there was a very definite narrative that was being put out that was anti-American, that was meant to demoralize us, that was meant to attack our institutions, that was meant to attack our actions overseas, and to make us the bad guy, to make Putin the good guy and Xi the good guy, Russia the good guy, and China the good guy. And this, the presence of this narrative, and the presence of trolls and shills who are very strident in defending this narrative, was made very apparent to me when I plugged out of the system for a while and took a look at what is going on. Because a lot of the alt media narrative simply did not add up. A lot of it is just lies. And we will talk more about that later. But what I'm talking about, are things like HARP used to control the weather. FEMA didn't support certain communities. And it's a lot of other things. The alt narrative is very powerful, and it gains a lot of traction with people. But the alt narrative on Ukraine simply was not playing out. It just didn't make sense after a while. And that's because the Russians have a disinformation program. And that Russian disinformation program has been going on for a long time. And they have talking points that are repeated by certain shills and other people, as I've talked about before. So, how do you fight trolls and shills? Well, there's this book, a little short book, about 100 pages, by Darth Putin, KGB. It is called The Darth Putin KGB Field Guide to Trolls. It is humorous, but it's accurate. Christmas time is coming up. Buy this for a couple bucks. I don't know how much it is. I don't know, $10 maybe. I don't know. But get this, and you have some fun reading it, and you can spot the trolls, and you can deal with them. So let me just read you a couple of trolls that he's identified. The what about troll, the basic description is that this troll exists in a simple world where the automatic reaction to any situation that it does not understand is to say what about, and then refer to some often made up action taken in the West, which is almost always a false equivalence. It considers logic to be an imperialist idea and dismisses immediately any awkward arguments based upon the concept. And then some of the common beliefs. A frequent call from this troll is something to the effect of whataboutism is a legitimate necessary tactic to highlight the crimes of imperialism, end of quote. In other words, the troll is aware that it is using ad hominem, but to bring about utopia, one must disregard the very concept of logic. In short, a Western nation doing something wrong is wrong, but when Russia and China do it, it's no longer wrong, but it's right. So how do you remove these trolls? Actually, despite all the Latin and the logic, it's quite simple. Your exchange will go something like this. You say, Russia has bombed another hospital. What a terrible crime. The what about troll says, now, what about, and then whatever war they suddenly care about. Then you respond, you're suggesting Russia is only as bad as the US or the UK or the Israeli military, whom you say are carrying out genocide? I wish you health saying that in Moscow. So you've just introduced two sides of his tiny brain to each other. Do not feel bad for the mental anguish this causes. For its only response will be personal abuse or further false equivalences. And a related troll is Russia was provoked troll and no to war, no to NATO troll. And I have seen all of this on social media. I've seen these arguments over and over on social media. Some of it's from people, some are from AI, but this is clearly part of the asymmetric warfare of Vladimir Putin and Russia. It is clearly part of the asymmetric warfare of Xi Jinping and the CCP, and this is a form of information operations. Okay, here's another troll. Um, and once again, why did they do this? They want to demoralize us. They want to divide us. They want us out of the international arena. They want the rule of law to go away. They want law, which is reason and unity and norms of conduct and peace. They want that to go away. Putin and Xi want all that to go away. They want rule of force. They want rule of and by the powerful, for the powerful. So here's another troll. This will cause nuclear war, troll. This is a big one. Okay, this troll has been convinced that every action taken by the West since February 2022 crosses a red line that will lead to nuclear war. At no stage has it stopped to consider that it is always wrong. Common beliefs is with almost all trolls, the fact that has never been right about anything to do with Russia's invasion of Ukraine does not mean it will shut up about it. Of course, each anti-tank weapon artillery system, long-range weapon, fighter aircraft, or strikes by Ukraine within the Kremlin's definition of Russia's borders would each be a major escalation that would cause nuclear war. Despite being convinced that Putin may actually kill every living thing on planet Earth, if provoked too much, this troll also thinks Russia is not killing civilians, attacking civilian infrastructure, and is generally just really nice. For these reasons, there's debate among trollologists about whether to rename this Schrodinger's troll in colloquial as well as formal terms. Removal, simple reminders of its past predictions, along with the inherent contradiction in thinking that nuclear war will be unleashed by a man too kind to kill civilians, will usually leave it silenced. Related troll is Ukraine is corrupt troll. Defense contractors want this war troll. Okay, this is very important. This is a good little book to have. The Darth Putin KGB Field Guide to Trolls, because it presents the arguments that you hear from a lot of people, from the jackal media, the alt media makes a lot of these same arguments, and they repeat them over and over again for emotional effect. Okay, I was going to talk more about law tonight, but let me say that this about law. Law is about reason, and the international system, as I said before, is based on the rule of law. It's based on law, which is reason, which is control of appetites and desires, control of vices. Law brings unity, it brings peace, it brings common action. It is the system by which for the last 80 years the international community, and it is a community of nations, has operated. It has brought us closer together. It has done good. But that system is now under attack. Now I'm going to talk about this in another session. I don't have time for this one. I mean, there's so many things to talk about. So I'll do another one really quickly. Before I go, I want you to remember we're the good guys. America, the USA, the West, we're the good guys. Putin, his supporters, apologists, followers, Xi, the CCP, his supporters and followers and apologists, they're the bad guys. Remember, we're the good guys. Thank you.